2019. We begin by general comments to the board. I do have one comment card. Two, I have a hand in the back. We will get that from you. You have 2 minutes for your comment. I recognize that that's not a ton of time, but if you have comments afterwards, please feel free to email us or contact one of our staff members, and you can continue your comment in that way, or reach out to us, call, all those things. As with our council meetings, our formal meetings, we do ask that people be respectful when people are giving their comments. Please no cheering, jeering, snapping, clapping. And most of it is that we want to make sure that people feel comfortable in making their comments, but also it makes it difficult for us to hear. And the point of comments is for us to hear what you have to say. So with that, I will begin our general comment section with Mr. David Ammett. If you want to come to the front and have a seat, it looks like the hot spot, but I promise it's not.
Perfectly fine.
And
in the hot spot.
Alrighty, it's all yours.
Great. My name is David Ammett. I'm here not representing myself, but rather the organization I represent, which is Preservation Utah. After last month's RDA meeting, I was asked by Roger Roper, who is the director of the State Historic Preservation Office, to read the following email regarding tax credits concerning the Utah Theater. David, I was surprised to see the claim surface in the recent articles about the Utah Theater that the building would not be eligible for National Register listing or for tax credits. As you know, we administer both of those programs, and we have maintained that both could be possibilities for the Utah Theater. I know that there are other factors that work against the success of this as a rehab project and that the odds are long, but we hate to see those issues misrepresented. To my knowledge, no one from the RDA or from the potential developers ever contacted us to explore the possibilities of tax credits. Amber, that would be Amber Anderson, the state tax credit coordinator, did say though that Danny Waltz was at Preservation Utah's board meeting last year where she told him and everyone else that as far as we were concerned, tax credits are still an option for the Utah Theater. One follow-up comment. I have not been privy to all the discussions regarding the Utah Theater, and in particular the mitigation of the demolition of the theater. I have not heard anything mentioned about documenting the theater if it's to go down. I think this building deserves to be documented. I think it deserves to be photographed. It deserves to be filmed and ideally drawn according to HABS, that is Historic American Building Survey standards. And Preservation Utah would be glad to facilitate that effort in any way we could. Thank you.
My next caller is Nigel. Nigel Swaby, if you want to come up.
Thank you. This is a lot easier than the last time when there was a big crowd. I'm here today to speak on 2 items, and I'm representing the River District Chamber as its chair. I'm also on the Fair Park Community Council, first vice chair. The first item is in regard to safety features for the Jackson Elementary, and I'm here to support that measure. There are a number of street crosswalks, signage in the area that needs help. I would also like to speak in favor of additional police patrols and security, as that school is a block away from the Gateway Inn, which is a constant struggle with criminal activity. The other reason that I'm here is to speak on the Catalytic projects from the RDA. Kara and her team have been out in the neighborhood and presented a number of ideas for us. And in considering them, there were 2 that stood out. One, obviously, the Folsom Trail signage and the development of temporary commercial buildings in that area. However, our board met this morning and we felt that the best use of funds for a catalytic project in that area is going to be supporting the international market at the State Fair Park. And so we would like you to consider that as being the most effective and fastest way to develop in that area, and that's something that you'll start seeing further information on in the coming months. Thank you for your time.
Do I have any other comments out there? Nope. Okey doke. Well, then we'll move on to regular business. First up is the Utah Theater. So, do we?
Madam Chair, as a reminder, this was actually just a placeholder in case council members had any questions that arose from public comment. If there's no questions from council members, we can move on to the next item.
Okay. Okay, 1 second, Anna. Danny, if you'll come to
Thank you.
the table. And it looks like we do have a few questions. Ben, you're available for us over there, and I see Tammy in case we need you. So you don't have to come up. We'll put Danny on the hot spot for right now. It's my favorite thing. Anna, you take it away.
Yeah, so Danny, thank you.
Yes.
As you know, and I think I emailed you earlier, we got several inquiries about the Utah Theater and what has it been done, what hasn't, what are the chances, is it too late, is there still time to work something out instead of demolishing it and losing it. So one of the questions, and I'll read what I have and I raised them to you. So since the Echoes Theater was built, was there any follow-up with the philanthropic organizations?
Yes, that's a good question, and I would say that since the Echoes Theater has been done, we have not had any specific conversations with any organizations. The reason for that specifically is because we really don't have a project yet to pitch, and so I think it'd be very difficult to gauge interest on something that we really don't identify. I think when you think of the Echoes Theater campaign was very successful by all intents and measures. It's arguably probably one of the most successful, and I think what made that successful is that the community could really get behind the idea that they were building a Broadway theater, and everyone was excited for that. And so until we really have something to speak to with Utah Theater, it would be a little premature to reach out and ask what their interest would be. It's not to say we couldn't do that, but I don't know what the results would be of that. The second thing I would say is that last year when we presented the potential capital stack and the gap for the theater, we anticipated a fundraising campaign that would be at the same level as Echoes, and that still resulted in a significant gap for the project. And so even if we had the same success as Echoes, we still projected that there would be a gap. And I would also add in response to the public comment that Capital Stack also anticipated that we would qualify for tax credits. And so whether we get a successful campaign or whether we get tax credits, those gap numbers that we presented anticipated both of those coming through. So.
Anna, did you have?
I have other questions, but James, go ahead.
Yeah, mine is actually just a follow-up in regards to the public comment that we had for tax credits. On historic tax credits, what's the usual percentage that you get on that? I mean, it's a huge gap, and you're looking at that, but I don't think as an RDA board member I've seen us use historic tax credits for that, so.
Yeah, we haven't generally. That's something the developers bring to the table. I think as part of our capital stack, we anticipated we'd qualify for the 10% amount. And I'd be happy to verify that or follow up with that if there is any
I
request.
just vaguely remember what 10%, so I was just wondering if that's a maximum, that's the most that they would contribute.
I believe so, but I would have to go back and check our notes before I'd claim to be an expert
That's
on
great.
tax
Thanks,
credits.
Danny. Appreciate it.
So I have other questions. So what would happen if the board decided to take time to reach out to those philanthropic entities and follow up now at this point?
I think that'd be a question and a conversation we'd want to first have with Hines, because at this point we've been working with Hines for quite a while. We've been working with them in terms of the due diligence, and I think to the extent that we would want to do that, one, we would really need to understand what the project is at that point and what we are asking, and then what that would mean in terms of a delay for moving it forward. And obviously Hines would want to be part of that conversation and then consider to what extent they would either want to participate in that or if they would still want to continue the conversation. We are working under the premise that our agreement with Hines is expiring
Okay.
soon, and now what we're negotiating with them right now is an amended purchase and sale agreement for the purpose of moving forward with the project. So that would obviously put those conversations on hold indefinitely.
All right.
It's a polite way to say I don't know what the true impact would be. I think that'd be to what extent we would really want to examine that potential for getting capital fundraising in the project.
Then so that answers the third question, but then what do you think is the city's interest to subsidize this? Let's say we still, Heinz doesn't go through, we go back to the community and talk about preserving this theater. What's the interest of the RDA or the city subsidize a project of the such, since we somewhat subsidized Eccles?
Over the years, we've done outreach with the community. We've had people look at it. Obviously, there's a lot of sentimental support for saving the theater. I think in terms of subsidizing it, if you're talking about subsidizing preserving the theater, I think where we're at as staff is essentially saying that the only way to do that would be a significant investment, capital investment by the city. And we have taken the approach that, given the size of that investment and other priorities and issues facing the city, that this is not necessarily the best use of public funds at this time. And so I think if we were really to examine that, that could potentially look like putting it out to a public bond. And I think that would be an issue that the city would really need to see if that was a priority. We have not gotten that interest internally as part of the administration. We have not necessarily gauged that level of interest from our public outreach. And so that is why we are where we are now, of proposing to move forward with the project and make the decision.
Last question. I know we're talking in the next project that we're going to talk in our agenda, so it kind of relates to that. So how much money are we saving on this refinance that we're doing? And what would happen if that money was used for the Utah Theater? If it's possible.
Another good question. Thank you. I'm glad you didn't give me any easy ones. So I would first say that the proposed savings from the bond right now are just that. They are estimates, because until you actually do the placement, you don't know what your true savings are. And so the projections right now speak to annual savings of roughly $200,000 a year and just under $2 million over the life of the bond. And so the first question on that would be to really determine where those savings would really be realized in terms of the debt service for the bonds right now are split between the Block 70 project area, which is the block that Eccles Theater is on, as well as subsidized by CBD tax increment as well. So I think we would really want to make sure that we run that calculation to see where those savings would be realized and or what policy level decision we would make of where we would want to realize those savings. So it's certainly possible that you could allocate those to a certain extent to Utah Theater if you looked at those numbers. I would say, however, that given within the Eccles Theater project and the Block 70 project area, we know right now that we have a shortfall for debt service. So obviously one of our main motivations for doing this refinancing is to really just reduce that shortfall that we are going to have to cover over the next 7 or 8 years. Number two, the agency as a whole has significant obligations to both the theater and the building itself, as well as the site that it sits on. And additionally, we have obligations for capital maintenance and repairs for the parking structure owned by PRI. So all of that is a way of saying that any savings we realize arguably will be used up within the theater project and Block 70 pretty easily. And so it's not to say as a board you couldn't prioritize funding those savings to something else, but as staff, I would say that we have a lot of other obligations to fund with that.
All right, thank you, Danny.
Thanks.
I'll continue.
So I also had a question. Where did we, I remember asking about the historic designations and whether or not that those would apply, and I kind of assumed that that included the taxes. Where did we get the information that those wouldn't, that the theater wouldn't qualify?
So that's a good question, and that's why I said I think it would be helpful if the board would like us to follow up on that, to go back and check our notes on that, because we made assumptions in terms of our capital stack that we presented a year ago. We did have a consultant come in and look at the theater and provide some recommendations as to what we may or may not really be able to qualify for reaching out to those tax credits. And so I think we can certainly follow up on that and get a determination of whether they qualify or not. We did that too, sorry.
I'm going to interrupt you real quick, sorry, and have Ben give a little bit of a clarification just on some of the historic designations that might help answer Chris's question.
So staff's understanding is not that the Utah Theater is ineligible, but that it is likely not competitive. So slight difference between not being able to apply versus, given the lack of historical integrity that remains, the likelihood of success is not great.
And that's with the National Historical Registry.
And for the historic tax credits as well. Now, that information is a few years old. I don't know if the standards have changed. I'm also not aware of the exact criteria, so if it's helpful, I'm sure RDA staff could verify the current application process and competitiveness.
I mean, I'd like to know that, because even if ultimately it doesn't make the difference, part of what the information that I've gotten that I've been relaying to the community, and maybe I misunderstood, it was given to me quite a long time ago, was that this doesn't meet those qualifications. Not that it was a long shot, but that it was like not on the table. So I would love to know, to have clarification on that, just so that I can know when I'm talking to residents. And then I have another question.
We're waiting. Does Tammy looks like she might have information, but I
Yeah.
don't know yet. Nope. Okay. Continue, Mr. Wharton.
Okay. And then, are we confident that, I'm having trouble getting my computer to pull up the amount right now that, of the write-down that we'd be doing for the land. But,
I'm looking for it.
okay, thank you. I don't know that I need the exact number, but Danny, what are your thoughts about the amount of write-down that we're considering giving for the property relative to the value that we're getting from having a public easement, a permanent public easement on the park? Do we have any sense of that? Like, how much would it cost the city to make a park like that, for example?
For the park itself or the walkway, because we are treating those two things differently within our agreement with Hines. So,
I would say more the park is what I'm interested in.
okay, the park. Let me back up, and it probably would help to explain both of those. So, as part of our required restrictions on the sale, we have the requirement that they would do the walkway,
Right.
which is obviously the pedestrian access to the open space area.
Yes.
We've been working with Hines to what extent we define that open space area as either primarily an amenity for the residents that is open and available to the public versus to what extent would we want to potentially consider additional incentives to make that truly a public park downtown. And obviously there's a nuance there, but that's how we're approaching it with Hines. And so that question that you're asking in terms of what would that incentive be and that subsidy is something that we have identified as part of the design and due diligence process to work with Hines on identifying to what level we could build that out as a park, what that cost would be, and then bringing that back and seeing if there is interest either by the agency or the city to put funding into that to elevate that level that space is improved.
Yeah, again, because I remember that in my meeting, the park, I think, is a big, having guaranteed public access to that, not just as an amenity to the building, but as a public space, well, not a publicly owned space, but a space that's open to the public.
Right.
Is really critical.
Yeah, and our intent is to provide the walkway and provide the ability to access the space. It's a question of what we want the space to be that may or may not have additional funding involved.
Yeah, I want more than a walkway, I think.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit more about the affordability, the units, relative again to also to the write-down?
So right now, as part of the required elements within the land use restriction that would be placed on the property, and what arguably the land write-down would be as it relates to affordable housing, we are requiring that 10% of the units be affordable at 60% AMI.
And for how long?
And that would be for 50 years.
Okay.
And
What do we think about that value regarding relative to the offset or the markdown?
from what we're looking at right now is between the three required elements of the affordable housing and the walkway and preservation of elements, you are realistically looking at probably a full write-down of value. And the numbers we are running and what the conversation that we need to have with Hines moving forward is, what is the details of that? What is the range? And are we able to fully get all of those benefits and realize them as part of the project within just the write-down?
And so essentially just gifting it to.
Essentially, the cost of providing those restrictions and benefits is more than what the land value is. And so that's the conversation with Hines to see how close we can get those and to what extent we prioritize those benefits to incorporate them as part of the development.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, I have another question.
Erin first, please. Sorry.
I wanted to ask about policy question 3, which is about the role of Preservation Utah if this project proceeds with development with Hines. And this is more about some of the physical aspects of the theater that should be preserved. Can you talk to us about what that role might be? And Danny, I'm not sure if you can, I can't think of another project in the city that we've done that, if this happens, that we can equate and point to the intentional preservation aspects.
Right.
Can you think of one that the city's ever done?
Preservation is part of a demolition ultimately of the project, or preservation? Yeah, I can't think of one where we, as an agency or city, did a demolition where we saved elements and or incorporate them, but
Brooks Arcade, maybe?
well, yeah, Brooks Arcade, I guess, technically was
Which
a
one?
partial demolition where we just saved the facade. And I don't believe we did anything internal to the building. Jill, do you remember if we did any documentation of it?
Yeah, I'm not sure if we did any documentation, historic survey on that particular building, but the original intention was to save the building.
So
A little complicated, but it ended up
And
being
it-
just a facade.
maybe not apples to apples, but in that case, and with my question still about what's the role of Preservation Utah, it seems that we might want to look at the way other cities, maybe even around the country, have undertaken this kind of a transformation. I know that I've visited a Pantages in Minneapolis with some of you on a Downtown Alliance trip, I believe it was. Actually, I can't quite recall if it was an RDA trip. It was downtown. And anyway, they did a full restoration, so that's not the same either. But what do you foresee as the role of Preservation Utah, and how can we make sure it's as robust as we can to preserve the historic nature of this building?
I think that would be definitely something we would want to do. I think right now, I think we haven't really looked at that because we're having the larger policy question of what we're doing with it before we really identify how we're going to follow through. We have had, as part of our conversations with the developers, not only the desire to preserve and include some of the elements within their project itself, but potentially if some elements don't have a place within their project, still archiving them, saving them, potentially trying to find other locations or uses for them and not just necessarily letting that opportunity go. And I definitely think if we were to move forward with demolition, that I think we would want to make sure that we document the building. We go in and do everything we can to preserve the memory of it and see what extent we either archive aspects and or just photograph them and work with Preservation Utah and other groups to determine what level they want that archive to be.
I follow up to say that I would love to explore a conversation about maybe it's even us funding an art installation, but some way to connect the block that the Utah Theater's on with the Eccles block and Regent Street, and I'm imagining some kind of visual connectivity of these arts and culture venues, those that are there today, the mid-block walkway that we created and tried to make feel historic. But I think that would be wonderful, and it would be a fun project for us to undertake with the developer and with the preservation community to create that connectivity across Main Street.
Okay, we happy to look at that and happy to have that be part of the project.
So Danny, just for clarification, if you have that, that would be great. If not, I understand. But how much do we buy this property for? How much is it valued at right now? And how much are we selling it for?
Let's see, it was purchased for, I think it was just over $5 million. Let me find, I don't have the exact number in front of me. It was valued in May at $4,070,000, and that was the land only because it's difficult to place a dollar amount on the building. It depends on how you're looking at the building in terms of if you're restoring it, what you're doing with the building. So the land value right now is $4,070,000.
Well, can I just ask something in between that? So if it's $4 billion, the city bought it for $5 million. Somebody thought the building was worth $1 million, right? Who was that?
200,000.
Yeah.
That probably would have been a value at the time of both the land and the building, and a negotiated price with the current property owner as far as what they felt their value would be to dispose of the property.
Well, and to bring it to light, I mean, there was an exchange in property over in Capitol Hill, right? That's how far back this goes, is that those empty buildings on 300 West and 6 North were part of a trade with the prior owner that they traded in order to make that all come about.
Okay.
Please do.
So
That was loud. It wasn't an entirely willing seller, I think is what people are talking around. And so the value wasn't necessarily directly correlated with the actual appraised value.
Okay.
So we bought it at, let's say, 5. Now it's worth 4, and we're gonna give it away. I mean, at 0. So
We would write the land down arguably in exchange for other public benefits that we would want incorporated in the project, yes.
And I found the exact number. It was in December of 2009, the board authorized the purchase of the property for $5.5 million.
5. Okay. All right.
And Madam Chair, just circling back really quick to the tax credit question, I believe in 2017 with federal tax reform, it impacted the 10% historic preservation credit program. So we can do some fact checking with that and provide additional information to the board.
That would be wonderful. Thank you, Tammy. Are there any further questions on this? Thank you both.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ben, too, for your clarification. Thank you, the whole team. Next, we have the RDA tax increment revenue refunding bonds. And if I can have Marina and Mary Beth at the table, please. And I'm just gonna remind the board that there is a motion sheet in your blue folders. And when it is time to make a motion, I would ask that you read the entire motion as it is written, please. Hello, ladies. Welcome to the table.
Thank you. So just a quick refresher. The briefing was a couple of weeks ago, and we're proposing to refund tax increment, RDA tax increment bond series 2013, approximate savings about $2 million. And in conjunction with the same refunding, we also, the city is proposing to refund series 2007. And because the RDA is contributing debt service, there are two resolutions that need to be adopted today.
Great. Are there any questions on this? In that case, I will look for a motion.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Board Member Mendenhall.
I move the Board of Directors of the Redevelopment Agency adopt the resolution authorizing the issuance and sale of not more than $46 million aggregate principal amount of tax increment revenue refunding bonds, Series 2019, and related matters. And I move that the Board of Directors of the Redevelopment Agency adopt the resolution approving an updated debt service schedule in an interlocal agreement with Salt Lake City for the Redevelopment Agency's participation in the payment of debt service on 2007A bonds issued by Salt Lake City for the construction of the West Side Railroad Realignment Project known as Grant Tower.
I have a motion by Board Member Mendenhall, a second by Board Member Rogers. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Done and done. Thank you. Number 3 on our list is the RDA Budget Amendment number 1. Danny, why don't you come back up to the table?
Love to.
Mary Beth, you left too soon, darling. You're on my list. Ben and Callie.
Let's see. I think we're good. As long as the screen's over.
No. Anyone can start. Whoever wants to. Ben, why don't you give us the lowdown?
This is the first budget amendment for the RDA for fiscal year 2020. This is the first briefing. The public hearing is scheduled for November 12th, and potential action is also scheduled for November 12th. There are 4 projects and programs. It is just over $5.8 million in total requested funding for 4 separate items. And 2 of these are time sensitive. One is the Revolving Loan Fund, adding additional funding, and $200,000 for environmental remediation at the station center. And let me pull up the summary table on the big screen. The first item is a request to increase the revolving loan fund budget $4.5 million. And these are a result of 3 early payoffs of existing loans. The current available to lend balance in the revolving loan fund is $385,000. The 3 loans that were paid off are up on the screen. And just a note that the amounts being paid off are slightly more than the $4.5 million that is requested in this budget. The $48,000 difference would go to the revolving loan fund's fund balance.
I like that.
And that balance is currently just over $1.1 million.
So with the 48,000, or once we approve this, it will add 48,000 to that?
The latter, the 48,000 added to the 1.1 million.
Great. So we'll have 1.2.
The reason that it is urgent, or time sensitive rather, is another item on your agenda today, the $3.1 million loan to the West End LLC can only be funded if you approve this $4.5 million. There is another loan in the pipeline. It's about $1.3 million. And if that does come to the board and if it's approved, then you would have just over $400,000 left available to lend in the revolving loan fund for the rest of the fiscal year. So one of the policy questions for the board is if you'd like to discuss if that is a level you're comfortable with, considering that we're not halfway through the fiscal year yet, or if you have questions about other projects in the pipeline for the revolving loan fund.
Can I pause you there and make Danny answer that question for me?
We have not received any other applications for loans. We do potentially have 2 or 3 people we are talking to in terms of whether they would submit an application and/or if they qualify, so.
And would they be, if they qualified and if they submitted applications, would they be expecting funding this year?
Most likely, yes.
And do we have any loans that are in the pipeline to be paid off anytime soon? Or can we get like a table of when we're expecting any loan payoffs?
So we don't anticipate anything other outside of our normal debt service, principal and interest payments that we receive throughout the year. We do not project or try to anticipate any potential payoffs. We take the approach that payoffs are random. And so when they come in, if they're significant enough, then we would bring it as part of a budget amendment. And if they're not, then we just roll them up as part of fund balance and then bring that through the normal budget process, so.
But don't some of our loans have, like I'm thinking of, but I don't know if that was a loan or not, have some payoff dates? I mean,
think what
even if
you're-
they're like years out, we
Yeah,
have
what
some
you're
loans that have
thinking
that.
of is major balloon payments. And so none of those are necessarily being tracked right now because those are part of 20 to 30-year loans that we've approved,
Oh,
so.
come on. Just kidding. Okay, thank you.
Madam
There-
Chair,
Yes.
based on previous years, do we have a guesstimate of what we'd be looking at for number of loans or amount we'd be asked, requested in the for the rest of the year?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know if we've ever really tracked what we've gotten, and I'd say it's probably hard to figure that out because just in the last year between Bryn Shore and the Union Pacific Depot, those 2 loans were more than we've ever done, and so I think we arguably would have missed our mark. We could certainly go back and look at what our annual amounts have been and kind of look at what a normal year would be, but usually we just try to go out and lend what we budget and make it available. So happy to do that if the board would like to see that.
I'm not sure if that would help us with a target, essentially, to get a sense of if we needed to find a contingency plan to get through the rest of the year, what would be the neighborhood we'd have to sort of figure out.
Sure. We could certainly provide a history of our loan approvals, and
I know it won't
see
be
if there's any
exact, and
pattern
it's,
there.
yeah, it's growing, et cetera, but it would be helpful for us to have a target to shoot towards if we needed that.
You can continue, please, Ben, unless there's more questions on this, on the loan fund.
The next item is a request to place $395,573 into a holding account. The holding account already has $250,000. The board placed that money there in the annual budget. These amounts are from tax increment. The direction from the board was to have a further discussion on the use of these dollars at a later date. At one point, these were the annual contribution from the RDA to the Housing Trust Fund. The purpose previously identified was for low-income and special need populations. The board could discuss this now or discuss it at a future date, but the request before the board is to add this $395,000 into the existing holding account. And a point of context, this is separate from the $2.59 million in funding our future housing dollars that is in the Housing Trust Fund. And there was discussion during the annual budget about combining these 2 different funding sources, the $2.59 million from funding our future and the funding in the holding account, the $250,000 and the $395,000. So this would maximize the impact. But they're 2 separate funding sources. And the sales tax funded funding our future has additional tracking requirements that were part of the agreement with the public, that it would be labeled separately, tracked separately, and used for specific uses. So that's part of the discussion is, do you want to have sales tax and tax increment funding for housing separate, or is the board comfortable combining them to maximize the impact?
Thoughts? Anybody want to discuss this now?
Well, we always, Madam Chair, we always like more bang for our buck, right? My question is, can we still separate it and track it? I mean, that's the whole point behind the dashboard, is to make sure that residents can track and see where our sales tax dollars are going. So as we overlay it, I don't want to say we're overlaying, I don't want to mix it, but if we combine the 2, right?
I'm just laughing because that's exactly what I just told Danny. I'm like, well, we can put a project, we can attach a project and activity code to those dollars that are funding our future dollars, and still, you can still put the whole entire pot together in order to increase the amount for future lending.
Right. I don't know, board members, I always get torn when we start talking about this kind of scenario, just because we don't want to be running two programs. You know, if the state's running a program and then the city starts a program, but I think that if we're having these monies together at one funding source for one person to look at, it makes it a lot easier for us.
I agree with you.
I think that answered the policy question 4 on coordinating the dollars. So Mary Beth, you're saying that we can attach a code to it that allows us to track it separately, but still allows us to combine with the pre-existing funding.
Correct.
The best of both worlds.
Correct.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Andrew? You look pensive over there, sir.
I think that the devil's in the details about how we track it, because if we put the money together and we use it for a joint venture, it's hard to pull apart what you got for each, and we need to talk through a little bit about that. I think the idea is sound. Just being clear about when we're using we allocate the money out to a project and it maybe gets mixed with multiple other things. It's hard to say how many units you got or how many specific outcomes you got for that. So just want to pay attention to that.
Anyone else? Great. Ben?
So based on the discussion, it sounds like instead of placing this into the holding account, the board's comfortable making the funds available for use.
Just to verify, for use consistent with the
Low
parameters
income.
that were put on the funding our future dollars.
Low income, special need populations, and subject to all of the tracking and reporting that funding our future dollars have.
Why don't we give you a straw poll on that? If somebody were interested in that. Ben just made it. All those that like the straw poll Ben just provided us, thumbs up. Okay.
We will update the motion sheet for your November meeting.
Thank you.
The next item is also time sensitive. This is related to Station Center environmental remediation at sites 3 and 4. This may look familiar. You previously appropriated $200,000 for this purpose, but it was not placed in a capital account, so it lapsed to fund balance at the end of the last fiscal year. So this would be reappropriating the same funds into a capital account for the same use. If it is not appropriated, it may delay the development of these 2 sites at Station Center.
Okey doke. Questions?
I know, Ben, I'm sure you do have it. A map showing us those 2 properties just in relation to Station Center?
I don't have the map ready to go, but it's the southeast corner of Station Center. I remember that. So it would be 300 South and 5th West.
Well, it was at our prior board meeting too, so I'll go back and look it up.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, Ben?
The last item is a request for $750,000 to go to the new track station at 650 South Main Street. The funding source is the seed funds for State Street. The board appropriated $1.5 million as seed funds for State Street and 9 Line. No specific identified uses at this time. The board appropriated just under $640,000 earlier this year in budget amendment number 4 of fiscal year 19 for the same project. If you appropriate the $750,000, it would not fully fund the project, but it does get you more than halfway there. The previous discussion was that 5 adjacent property owners would be contributing funds for the rest of the project. The total estimated cost for the new track station is about $2 million total. And UTA has offered to cover ongoing maintenance once it is built. However, there are not currently individual agreements with the adjacent property owners for their contributions to build the station or to reimburse the RDA if the RDA front loads the cost. And there is not currently an agreement with UTA for the ongoing maintenance of that station. If the board's interested, you could explore contingent appropriations to appropriate the funding, but wait to have some or all of those agreements come back to you. That is certainly something we can work with the attorney's office to prepare that language. There are also a few policy questions on this topic, in addition to the reimbursements and what level of enforceability the board is comfortable with, as well as using the seed funds for the track station. Is this catalyzing development as the board previously wanted the seed funds to do, or is this advancing the goals of the State Street project area in a way the board is satisfied with? And also adjustments to the free fare zone. The free fare zone does not currently extend to this new location, 650 South. It currently ends at 500 South. And the free fare zone has been set in interlocal agreements with UTA, and UTA has also unilaterally extended it when it added new stations, specifically the old Greektown and the 600 West stations. And there's additional info at the end of the staff report about the history of the free fare zone, if you're interested.
And so we were talking earlier, just something Ben mentioned to me earlier for board members' knowledge is that we did have at our last discussion, I think it was at the last discussion, of how do we ensure that surrounding properties, and Ben sort of touched on this, but actually do contribute to this or want to contribute. And one of the things, in case missed it, is that we could appropriate this with language that says you don't get the money unless you assign so it'd be appropriated with a contingency that you have to participate in some way in order to have this out there, kind of. Does that make sense for everybody, Erin?
Is it that they would not deny an SAA if it comes through?
I think that I know Ben's been working with Katie in the attorney's office to see what that language is. I'm not sure yet, but I think it would be something probably along those lines, or something that kind of obligates them to participate with us.
It's anticipated it would be a contractual agreement wherein if the agency were to bridge the gap and provide the funds up front, we would have agreements with the developers in place that they were obligated to pay us back within a certain amount of time. And the collateral for that would vary depending on what we would ask for in terms of either a guarantee by the developer and or security against land, depending on where they're at within their respective negotiations. But the idea would be that we would front-end load the money so that we keep the project moving forward, start engaging the design and UTA to construct it, and then we would have the instruments requiring the developers to reimburse us.
Anna?
What about the maintenance? If that was the case and we went forward with that, what about the maintenance of this
So that would
station?
also be an agreement with the UTA. So RDA would arguably enter into several agreements with UTA, ranging from the design of the station, moving into the construction of the station, and then all of those would anticipate that UTA would agree towards the ongoing operations and maintenance of the station.
Anybody else? Okey doke. Is that it for this item?
Those are the 4 items in the budget amendment. Just wanted to point out if the board is interested in the cash reserves or the fund balances for all the project areas and all the funds, they're listed in the additional info section. I know that's a request that comes up periodically.
Thank you, Ben. This is a great staff report, by the way. So thank you for your hard work and all of the information that you can read our minds that eventually one of us is going to want. So I appreciate you putting it in there first, and expect somebody to ask, and then you can just point them back to your own staff report, because that's generally what happens. So thank you.
Councilmember Fowler, I
Yes.
do want to state that those numbers are not completed audited financial numbers. So
They're
note-
approximates.
Note that they could change because the audit hasn't been completed yet.
We won't get mad at you, Mary Beth. If there's nothing further, we'll move on from that. Oh, we do need to set we just so the board knows.
In the consent agenda.
This will be, we're setting a public hearing, just so we know, for sometime in November.
November 12th.
Great, thank you. Next, we have are we on number 4? The resolution for North Temple Urban Renewal Area Interlocal Agreement. Ben, Danny, and Jill.
All right.
Thank you. This is just a follow-up from our discussion last July. We wanted to discuss the possibility of amending our interlocal agreement with the school district for the 10% set aside that was go to building a new school. The board wanted additional information, so we met with the school district and they provided us some cost estimates on some items that they may consider putting into 3 particular schools, and those are listed in your memo. And also, we revised the interlocal agreement to ensure that the funds are being used for schools serving the North Temple area, that the RDA will prioritize funding improvements for safety and connectivity to the neighborhood, and that any safety crossing designs must be approved by Salt Lake City Transportation. We reviewed these changes with the school district, and they are in agreement with them, so we are just looking for any discussion and approval.
And just to remind board members that when we had this discussion, I think particularly James and Andrew had just some questions and concerns, and I want to make sure that those were addressed because it affects mostly your guys' district. And Andrew?
Yeah, they were addressed. We just wanted them to clarify if they did intend to use it for the 3 schools just around that versus maybe some other things in the periphery of the city. And it was reflected in the new language, so thank you.
Great. I'm glad that worked out. Thank you to the staff for making sure that that got clarified and that those concerns were addressed. With that, if there's no further discussion, I would actually look for a motion to adopt the resolution. Or not, whatever.
Madam Chair, so moved.
Second.
I have, wait, which one? Because I did say or not, so I want to make sure the record is clear.
We are for the resolution.
All right, I have a motion to adopt the resolution by Councilmember
Interchangeable. Yeah.
Johnston, and a second by Board Member Rogers. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Thank you again for your hard work on getting that
Thank you.
done. Thank you. Next, we have a loan discussion.
We do, and just to remind the board.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you before you even start. I know that Allison is out sick today, so Danny, you're going to kind of be in it and running the show, but Jen will be here to take notes and add any anything that we need to do. So it's all on your team, and we'll take notes.
I'm gonna run the show and introduce my team.
I would like to make a disclosure, if possible.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hi. I own a property at maybe about 500 feet away from this property. I have talked to my neighbors or the developers in the past, and they have used one of my businesses as a catering company for one of their events.
Okay. Thank you.
So that you know. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Should I just start?
Yeah.
All right, so this is a loan for the West End development. It's located at approximately 740 West, 900 South. And maybe, slides aren't working. Let's see. Sorry, let me try to reload these real quick. Yeah, it wasn't.
While the presentations we're figuring out the technical difficulties, I can give a quick update on the 9-line community reinvestment area. In the memo, we mention that the 9-line, while it's been adopted by the RDA board and the Salt Lake City Council as a project area, that we're still in the process of negotiating with taxing entities. And at the time the memo was submitted, we did not have official buy-in from any of the taxing entities, but officially last week, the Salt Lake City School Board voted to approve moving forward with the 9-line and finalizing negotiations. So that's an update on that. And are we ready?
Yes, we're ready.
And the State Street project area.
Yes, the State Street as well.
All right, sorry about that. So just a quick overview. The developer of the project is West End LLC, and they're looking to adaptively reuse 2 existing warehouses that will be converted into commercial space. So in addition, the developer is looking to activate and improve the mid-block walkway that's located immediately west of the properties in between 900 South and Genesee. And it'll also include public space improvements and a central plaza located in between the buildings. The total cost of the project is approximately $4.7 million. In terms of the timeline, the developer anticipates to break ground in spring of 2020, and construction will take about 6 months. So this is just an aerial view of, the site has since cleaned up quite a bit, but this is the Google Earth view of the site. So this is I-15 here to the east of the property. And this is 900 South, and you can see the 2 warehouses there. And I just want to also note that the developer does own kind of the larger, like about 10 parcels, I think, within this area. And this would be the first phase of the project. They are looking into a second phase of the project, but that would incorporate a multifamily component to this. And that would require a rezone of the property. And they are working with the community right now to kind of look at how much to rezone and kind of work through that process. There's also a street closure application that will also be coming your way that is in between these 2 buildings, so just like kind of a remnant piece of alleyway that was left over. And here's some existing site photos. You can see the 900 South street frontage here. This is the east elevation of the building, and this is looking into the alleyway west of the property. Here's a site map. As you can see, this is the larger area for the larger development, but today we are just talking about the first phase, which includes these 2 commercial warehouse buildings. And this is a view. 900 South is to the right, but looking at kind of the central plaza that would connect the 2 warehouses, including kind of the public way or public walkway improvements and just additional public amenities within this project. Here's the rendering.
Question?
Yes. Yes.
Sorry, just one question from Board Member Mendenhall.
Will you flip back to that orientation? Thank you. So am I reading it right that the parking access would be off of Genesee, not off of 900 South?
Yes, that's correct for this first phase.
Great, thanks.
Well, I believe maybe the developers can talk about this. I think the intention is to make the alley one-way from 9th to Genesee. So you have access from 9th in and then out. The opposite, off Genesee when you go exit. Am I wrong about that? I'm right, okay.
And this is just a rendering of what kind of the alleyway would look like. So to the right here would be 900 South, and the alleyway here, so the activation of that mid-block. Here are the north and south elevations of each of the buildings. So on the top one is the south building that faces 900 South. You can see the south and north elevations for each of those. And on the bottom is the north building, again, the north and south elevations of each of those. And then here's a look at the east and west elevation. The top one shows the west elevation with, this is where the alleyway would run, and then the other side is, this one on the bottom is the east elevation. The applicant is seeking primary financing, as a traditional bank loan would be cost prohibitive and would be difficult to obtain due to the risk involved with commercial development and with the rehabilitation of old buildings. The RDA policy allows the RDA to provide primary financing if it includes 6 public benefits. The applicant is seeking an RDA loan of up to $3.1 million and is bringing to the table about $1.6 million in equity. The applicant is requesting up to $3.1 million. So the base interest rate would be 3 points above the U.S. Treasury yield, and then that from there, there would be a reduction of a 0.5 percentage point of each public benefit that they will be providing. And the public benefits include adaptive reuse, public amenities, economic impacts, transit alternatives, architecture and design, and sustainability. And we can go into those a little more if you need some more details. It would be a 5-year term, and then we would have first position lien on the loan, and there would be a personal guarantee from Max Kreth, the developer. Let's see. And the RDA Finance Committee reviewed this loan on September 17th, and the voting members unanimously voted to approve this loan. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Tammy?
The only other piece of information the board may want to consider is that there are $750,000 in seed funding set aside for the 9-line. So I don't know if the board would wish to consider utilizing some of those funds, considering that the revolving loan fund is lower on funds right now. So,
Board Member Mendenhall?
I had a question on the environmental or the sustainability discount. I've gone through the 22-page packet and I didn't find any details on it. Maybe I missed it, so if they're in there, if you could point me to a page number, and if not, could you just talk to us about what the environmental benefits are?
Yeah, so on the RDA staff memo, starts on the second and continues on to the third page.
The bullet points?
Correct.
Under sustainability measures not included but not limited to? Those ones?
I think you have the board, or the...
That's correct, yeah.
You're looking at the council staff report.
Oh, yes, that's the council staff report.
Yes, I was looking for the benefits in the words of the applicant. So, and what I'm curious about, and I have been on the previous projects also, is what kind of guarantee do we have on the amenity or the environmental and sustainability upgrades? How do we end up enforcing that or making sure that it has happened? And yeah.
Yeah, these would specifically be contractually obligated through the loan agreement that we execute with the borrower. And I know that the development team has thought through the sustainability measures quite a bit, and they're in the audience behind us if you want additional information from them on the specific measures.
No, but maybe if they come up, maybe they don't need to come up for just this, but in terms of our enforcement or ensuring post-production, post-construction, that these things have been installed, who does that?
Well, we would do that as part of the construction draw process. So if there's an element that is part of the construction process, we would definitely ensure that those are being implemented as we go through the construction draw process. And then any that are ongoing, we would require annual reporting requirements on meeting those. Okay. And they would be in default of the loan agreement if any of those were not followed through.
That's great. I really look forward to when we get time to unpack, some more specifics and recommendations we can build into this so that it is, this looks like a good list, but I don't really know what the spectrum of opportunity is, and that the technology in building and energy is evolving so quickly that I hesitate on the one hand to ask us to put things in writing to put a finer point on what our expectations are for that public benefit. And yet we've seen a real spectrum of environmental sustainability for this 0.5% reduction. Without any judgment on this particular one, we've seen a real spectrum of it. And everybody who does something, it feels like gets the 0.5%, while some do much more and some do far less. So I look forward to having that conversation.
I would say that's what we're working on right now as part of that next step of the guiding framework, is really defining those metrics, to what extent they would qualify for that, and what is either on that list or what that range is that we would expect them to come back in a way that we can then concretely measure that within projects and against other projects that they've received that benefit. So.
And with this specific project, we really thought through, since it is adaptive reuse, the sustainability measures are going to look different than if it's a new construction building. So Tracy was heavily involved in that, but really thinking through with the developer what could be implemented as far as sustainability measures.
When it refers to the project, is that all phases of the project or just phase one that we're looking at?
Just phase one.
Great,
for this.
thanks.
So the mortgage lien would be limited to the phase one property and the guarantee.
And the applicant is here if you have any additional questions for him and his team.
Would anyone like the applicant to come up and speak? I don't want to put them on the spot if we don't need to. No? You lucked out. Unless you want to come speak to us. So for the board members' information, they were sort of looking for some action either today or in November. As was pointed out, the revolving loan fund doesn't have yet enough money to fund this project until November. However, if the board decided to take action today, we can take action approving or not, right, but approving the loan with the contingency that it wait until the loan fund actually has the money in it. Does that make sense for everyone?
Yeah, Madam Chair,
Yeah.
I'm happy to make a straw poll approving this as soon as the money's funded into the account.
Okay. We have a straw poll on the table. What?
That's an option, or I guess a motion, right?
So
Yeah, I move that we approve the agreement as soon as the money's funded.
I have a motion by Board Member Rogers, a second by Board Member Luke. Is there any further discussion on this? All right, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, there you go. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Madam Chair?
Yeah.
That's so cool. 9-line, the first 9-line project area project, and it looks like a great one. So congratulations.
Yes, congratulations. Thanks for all the hard work out there too, by the way.
Yeah, Madam Chair, they actually held a community council meeting in their building 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago now. There is significant interest by the neighbors in rezoning a lot of that block. Right now it's M1, but it's all mostly residential. It's just historically it's non-conforming. To put it in mixed use, just like this development. So we may see that come before the council in weeks to come or months to come.
That'll be fun. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, Anna.
As the city planner working in the West Salt Lake master plan and all West Side stuff, this is finally coming, to life, all the things that we envisioned with the help of your husband, Kyle, back in the day, and with this group as well. So I'm so excited for this one. And they're my neighbors, and I'm excited for that too. So
Gonna be fun. Great. Thanks, everyone. We're just gonna stay over on the north and west side, you guys. Let's just stay there for a while, shall we? I can't, then I wouldn't be a councilwoman anymore. We're going to move on to the North Temple Project Area Catalytic Development Strategies. And I want to this particular agenda item is somewhat specific to North Temple, but I'd also like to posit that we as a board begin sort of thinking about, because I think this leads into a broader conversation, what does catalytic mean? What do we mean by catalytic projects? Because I think we're going to be seeing this with the State Street project, the 9-line, things along these lines of a bigger policy discussion. So like I said, this is a bit more specific to North Temple, but I would like for our board to kind of start thinking in a policy manner of what does catalytic mean, so that we can really get these projects going. I know James and I have talked about like having a catalytic project and then it not really be the thing that we thought it was going to be, and how to kind of make sure we fix all of that, which is what you're trying to do with this project. So welcome to the table. Kara and Ben and Danny have been here, so we'll just get going.
Okay, I think the only thing I would say before Kara starts is just kind of to provide a little context in that regard, as well as that This item is really specifically in response to just over $800,000 that the board has appropriated over the past 2 years in terms of providing funding for a catalytic project. And so the work that Kara and the team has done is trying to come back to the board and provide ideas for what that could look like, so that we arguably can work with the board in terms of rolling out those funds. So having said that.
All right, thank you, Danny. So as Danny mentioned, we started this process of looking at potential projects and programs after our May board meeting, when the RDA board reviewed the RDA's proposed budget for fiscal year 20. And in that budget, there was a line item for North Temple Catalytic project. So at the time, Board Member Mendenhall requested that rather than coming back with a specific plan for spending that funding, that we identify some potential programs and projects for it, go out to the community, hear from them about their priorities, and then return to the board for a discussion about those ideas and have that discussion here. So I have a little bit of background in this presentation, and then some of those ideas that we've come up with. It's certainly not exhaustive, but it's based on what we heard from the community and also what we've successfully implemented in other project areas. This goes so fast. I wish I had the... Okay. So just to start with the RDA mission, I think... Oh, I can't do it. Okay. Don't touch it. This mission statement is, as we all know, a work in progress, but it identifies our mission as to revitalize neighborhoods and business districts to improve livability, spark economic growth, and foster authentic communities. The RDA serves as a catalyst for strategic development projects that enhance the city's housing opportunities, commercial vitality, and public spaces. So that's kind of the overarching theme that we were considering when we looked at potential ideas. This next slide has the North Temple project area. I cannot do that. Oh, click it. Oh, okay. Which generally goes from I-15 to Redwood Road, and then 2nd or 3rd North to about South Temple or 1st South.
Guess not.
Okay. Also, to provide some framework for the discussion, these are the objectives that were identified in the project area plan that was approved in 2011 when we created the North Temple project area. I'll just go through them quickly because they do establish this framework for the ideas that we have. So they're to encourage transit-oriented development, participate in creating a walkable community, create an extension of the City Creek corridor, preserve residential neighborhoods, redevelop the state of Utah's State Fair Park, assist in improving environmental conditions, create and renovate open spaces for the community, promote sustainable practices, design for excellence and cost effectiveness, create safe, vibrant, and useful public spaces, and promote population growth and stability. So we have some current activities going on in the project area. They include the Spark project, which is the overnighter motel purchase and RFP, the Congregation Spirits Loan, which was approved by the RDA board this year for the development of a distillery and bar and grill on 9th West. The Fair Park Public Market Feasibility Study, which is just getting wrapped up and will be presented to the board probably before the end of the year. We are collaborating with other Salt Lake City departments and UTA on the Folsom Trail design and construction. And we collaborated with those same Salt Lake City departments to assess the feasibility of daylighting City Creek and Folsom Corridor. This map here shows those projects I just mentioned, as well as projects that have been completed. So working from west to east on this map, we have the Overnighter Motel Spark project. The next number on there is the tracks, which was completed in 2013, not by the RDA, but that's certainly a catalytic project in this project area. The next, number 6, is the public market study for the Fair Park, which has been centered around the historic barns at the Fair Park. And then moving a little bit southeast, we have Congregation Spirits, the Red Iguana 2 loan that the RDA provided, the Folsom Trail design, and the City Creek daylighting study, and then finally the public art under the I-15 overpass. Now we're going to get into the ideas that we've come up with, as I mentioned, with input from the community and based on what we've done in other project areas. So the first one, and there are 7 ideas here, just in case you want an idea of how long this will go on. The first one is the interim and temporary uses of city-owned property in Folsom corridor. And this came out of input we got from the community that the trail for Folsom, the Folsom Trail will be about 14 feet wide, and this corridor ranges from probably about that wide up to almost 100 feet. And so there are areas where the city owns property that will not be used for the trail, and so until there's further development in the corridor, there's a suggestion that some of that property could be used for interim uses. This picture on the bottom right of the slide is a use similar to this that I saw when we were in Vancouver this year for a conference. And it was really made out of a container, and it was a pop-up on the side of a trail that had also been built in an old rail corridor. And it was called the Thingery, and it was just kind of a rental space for equipment, for tools and camping equipment that people could become members of and then borrow equipment from there for free. So I just thought it was a great example of an attractive use of the side of the trail. The Thingery, yes. The second idea is to use our revolving loan fund to assist buyers of contaminated properties. So there are potential buyers of property in Folsom Corridor that have run into some obstacles because of contamination on the site. And so with a traditional lender, often there's a need for the site to either achieve no further action status or for the state to say the remediation goals have been met. And so if that's not possible before someone buys a property, we thought we could, or the board could consider using the loan funds to provide sort of a bridge acquisition loan, so and then the loan would stay in place while the site was remediated, and then once it reaches those goals, it could be taken out by a traditional loan. The third idea was for an adaptive reuse loan program, similar to what the RDA has done in the granary. For that program, the intent is to convert underutilized properties into more active uses, and that program is for forgivable loans up to $200,000, and they require a match, kind of on a sliding scale. And it's intended to fund upgrades that are related to meeting building code because they're older buildings. The next idea is Facade Improvement Grant Program. As you probably know, this is something that is currently is a program administered by hand, but their boundaries for their program don't include the North Temple project area. So that might be something the board wants to consider for that program. The next idea is Folsom Trail Enhancement and City Creek daylighting ideas. So as I mentioned, the Folsom Trail is planned to be about 14 feet wide, including landscaping. And so this idea is to use RDA funding to supplement that trail design and the amenities that come with the trail. We've met internally as a team with the other city departments that are involved in the Folsom Trail and identified landscape, lighting, signage, art, and trail delineation as priorities. So we thought that RDA funds could be used to supplement city funding to cover those expenses. The next idea is to implement a public art program, also similar to maybe what we did in the Granary with a mural program. It could also be used for a more iconic piece of public art that goes through the city's public art process and has something that would draw community members to the corridor to see that art. And then the final strategy was to do strategic property acquisitions and acquire properties for development that the RDA could oversee. So those are the ideas that came out of the process, and I guess we are looking to the board for direction on whether the board wants to prioritize these ideas, if we've missed some that we need to add to the list. Things like that.
Well, we heard a public comment earlier today about the community council supporting an international public market, and that we'd hear more about that. Do you, at this date for park, is this coming from the feasibility study, or can we? I know you're not presenting that to us today, and if you want me to wait until you do, then just tell me. But I think that if that is what the community council has mentioned, then for me personally, I'd rather wait to prioritize anything until we hear more about that particular project. So if you can't talk about it now, I get that, just tell me, but that would be where I'm at. Does that make sense?
Yes. Do you want to answer the timeline for finishing that and bringing it?
Yes, I can answer that. The draft report has been finished, and I think some community members have heard the results of that because of the technical advisory committee who heard the presentation on it. The report's being finalized, and we're hoping to be able to have the consultant come back to Salt Lake City to present it to the board in November or December of this year. So I guess then I'll turn it over to you, how we want to fit that into these potential projects and programs.
Yeah, I think we can certainly, if that's the desire of the board, I think we could certainly have these funds kind of wait until that presentation and get direction in terms of how you want us to roll those out. I would say that based on the feasibility study and the presentation, I think we would all agree that really the next steps for that would be coordinating with the state and what their willingness would be and what their next steps would be in terms of implementing that. And then the question for us would be the timing of that happening versus when we'd want to allocate funds. And so if that's something that we'd want to do, does it make more sense to then have that potentially be a budget allocation in next year's budget rather than wait until that happened? And does it make more sense to put these funds to something that arguably may happen in the short term? And I think that's just certainly part of the direction and the policy conversation that we'd want to hear from the board and what the priority would be.
I think that's an excellent question, and so I'd love to hear from other board members about how you would like to move forward. Like I said, that was not a direction from the board, that was my thought only, speaking from Amy Fowler. So if other board members have ideas on how we want to move forward, I think it would be helpful to RDA staff to be aware of kind of where we're at and what we're thinking. Erin?
These are awesome ideas, and I love that travel has informed some of your ideas and examples of what other cities are doing. I wonder from how the financing opportunity plays into the ability to do one or more or combination of some of these ideas.
And when you say financing opportunity?
Well, so we've funded the Folsom Trail, but not these additional potential amenities or signage or unique art. We've also talked about increasing, which we just did the percentage for art to 1.5%. We haven't talked about how that could maybe come to play here. And the increment for the area what opportunities, and I don't expect you to have these answers today, but what kind of money could we play with here? Whether it's arts money or project area money, and so I'm just wondering how we could actually apply some of these ideas and what the capacity is financially.
I think that's do you want to respond first?
I can hear what you say, and then we'll add to it if we want to.
Thanks. I think that's a great question. I think same with the feasibility study. I think if we ran down this list, there's a few of these that we could actually put in motion right now without necessarily any funding in place, but arguably we could see if we wanted to, extend the adaptive reuse program, if we wanted to broaden our revolving loan fund, if we wanted to work with HAND to kind of expand their facade. Those are things that I think we may or may not want to do just regardless. And then certainly if we start getting requests and demand for those, then that becomes part of the demand for financing and what we want to do. Likewise with Folsom Trail, as the city finalizes that design, we certainly as an agency could engage what those opportunities may be to expand those enhancements and then do the due diligence on what that cost could be, and then come back and have an informed discussion of what we would really be looking at in terms of what the agency may want to put towards that in a future budget allocation. And so for me, I think arguably as staff and as an agency to go out and try to continue to make an immediate impact, I would say put the money in things that may come to us right away, like loan requests and development, and maybe look at buying a property or two or working with some of the properties that are there, while at the same time trying to work on those mid to long-term goals of really just trying to set those up. And then as opportunities continue to come in, then we can see where the needle is really moving and where we want to put future funding.
Yes. So
I was waiting for Kara to see if she was going to add anything to that.
Informational today, right, Madam Chair? We can't make a motion to expand our facade program or something, but I would love for you to come back with those kind of options for us to take a vote on. And what was I going to ask about? Oh, on which corridor was it? Is it Folsom? That has the incredible width in some parts. Mm-hmm. I would love to learn about how or what it would take for us to create like a food truckable shoulder off of Folsom right there for temporary activation, and what it would take for us to have that opportunity on the corridor. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Of course, perhaps based on that, maybe what we could potentially do is when you are ready to present the feasibility study, we can also sort of include this as a follow-up agenda item, because they kind of do all tie together a little bit, and maybe have some of these questions answered, or at least some more information for us on these ideas, some funding sources, the feasibility study, kind of, maybe we can do a big briefing on that whole thing. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And then real quick, one question I would ask is why HAND's facade problems? I don't have a brain anymore. Facade program, what their boundaries are and why, and if we can expand, like looking at the feasibility of expanding that. I think that's a big one. That is a low-hanging fruit. I'm just actually curious as to why there's boundaries on it more than anything.
Madam Chair, the boundaries are up on the big screen.
The orange?
The orange are the target areas. This is also related to an item on the council's agenda later today about the new 5-year consolidated plan for HUD federal grants, including CDBG. So one of the policy questions is to what extent the council and the board would like to align RDA project areas with the target areas to spend CDBG dollars. The blue areas in the map show that all of the census block groups in the North Temple project area are income eligible for CDBG, but none of them are within the orange target areas in the current plan.
How do we pick a target area?
The council picks it.
Recommended by the administration. I have just one other piece to add, which is that I think while the facade improvement program is funded largely by CDBG, and so there it's governed by that target area, the council and board could decide to fund it through general fund dollars, and then it would not have the same kind of limitations. So there's that to consider too.
Remind me when we're when I'm a council member and not a board member.
Later today.
Yeah. Ask the questions about how we pick target again. Thanks.
Madam Chair, and to give you just a little bit more background on that
Anna,
one.
can I,
Sorry.
sorry, Chris was first.
Oh, but if it's related to this,
Yeah, it's
then,
related
yeah,
to
go ahead.
that.
'Cause I
So
gotta-
the North Temple project area had a facade improvement grant program before the CDBG on Central, and so that's why maybe it wasn't. Yeah, and that one was funded by the RDA, and it was a difficult one to deploy, to be honest with you. It was a matching one, meaning that if they asked for $5,000, they would have, a business would have to put $5,000 as well. So it was only a number of businesses took advantage of that program, but I think it was because of the strings attached in a way. So, but I would revisit it as well, again, with different requirements.
Great, thank you. Chris?
Well, I'm really taking, you're asking us, what does catalytic mean to heart?
Thank you so much, thank you.
And the definition, I think, is really helpful. It's relating to or involving an action that's a catalyst. So,
That sounds like your lawyer wrote that.
I know, right? That was really boring. But I'm asking that because I love the temporary ideas. And, but can you, maybe you can answer today, maybe you answer more when we have this future discussion we're planning. But how do temporary projects, how are they catalytic? And I want you to pay special attention to the very elucidating definition that I provided. Not that I provided.
We can send it to you. It's a pretty complicated definition.
Yeah, it's heady. But yeah, how do they help us? How does something temporary be catalytic? And how do we know that it's attributable to that temporary thing?
Well, maybe we could go on to the definition of catalyst, since that was in your definition of catalytic.
It says catalytic. So. Okay, yes, sure.
And so that's something that causes a reaction, right? Or causes a change. I think temporary uses can do that by bringing people to a place. And I mean, that's kind of oversimplified, but right now we will have a trail with not much going on next to it, but a neighborhood that wants to use the trail. And what we've heard is that amenities along the trail would attract people to it. So I think that's my first stab at an answer. We can think more about it as a team, but.
Yeah, no, I would just build off that it's bringing people to the area, showing interest in the area, having people start seeing the opportunity that can come from that, and then having developers and property owners then starting to be willing to capitalize on that. And then that arguably starts that chain reaction and effect that you want to see that become more permanent uses and draw us to the area.
And how do we know that works?
That is the question. And that is what, I mean, we take the approach arguably that as an agency and as a staff, our goal is to try to make every project a catalytic project to some degree. And obviously scale and context and what project area we're talking about all come into play. And so not to keep going back to our guiding framework, but that really is what, if you remember Court talking about, that's our next step, is to take this to the level of kind of what Kara just did here with North Temple. This type of exercise, these type of suggestions and projects became what we start looking at for our project area work plans. That is, staff, we identify what our priorities are from the project area plans and the master plans to what those catalytic projects really could be. And then that's arguably what we come back to the board every year and ask for funding to support and carry out. And then as part of that, we try to set goals that we can then measure against to see when have we accomplished that goal and have we been successful, and then reassess if that success has actually resulted in becoming catalytic or if there's some other approach that we need to take and start trying to drive the needle another way.
Okay.
Another approach that the board and the council has taken is not everything can be measured, but some things can, especially when there are specific objectives that have been identified by the board. And looking at those objectives, some of these do have metrics you could look at. I mean, the easiest being number 11, promote population growth. We can certainly look at tracking the population of residents. We can look at transit ridership at the track stations and the bus stops within the project area. You could also look at the number of business licenses in the area. So there are some metrics you could look at for specific objectives.
Temporary ones. Meaning how do we make sure that meaning how do we make sure when we do, thank you, a temporary project that it's also catalytic too? Because sometimes, we might not be able to do the metrics, but I take your point.
Madam Chair, I think about before I was on the council, before you were here, Danny, but I think in the time in between you were here, when the city funded the 7th South median in the granary, where Alfondre and probably someone else, Granary Row, thank you. Do you remember that? And it was cool, and then it was over. And it's hard to say whether or not, was it worth our investment there? It activated that street for a while, and it brought people to that area who, like me, who probably wouldn't have gone there but for that activation. Did it end up immediately resulting in a catalytic dramatic change which is, if we go to our mission, it's really about catalyzing for strategic development, right? For significant transformations. And activation might be that spark that leads to developers or investors seeing an area in a new way because they're having a beer there and listening to a band, and they never would have gone there otherwise. But it's really hard to say. On the one hand, we could say Granary Row failed, but I'm not sure that it did.
I don't think it failed.
Yeah, I know, and now...
I know the RDA can talk about this. There are pop-up stores that are now in bricks and mortar because of Granary Row.
But is that a catalytic change? Are we going to have a catalytic change in that neighborhood? Oh, yeah. It is afoot.
It's happening, yeah.
And anyways, I love these activation ideas. I think it's appropriate for us to talk about making them happen. And it's really, I just don't want to tie us too much to like an immediate result, because that some catalytic reactions, even in a laboratory, take a really long time. But once they happen, it's...
And I think as staff, we would say, to your point, Aaron, that sometimes a catalytic project is really getting the community engaged and interested in their own area. And you probably saw that with Granary Row, saw it with Central Ninth, where it's them identifying and creating their own brand and what they want to be. And then that is arguably what then snowballs.
Andrew, you had a comment?
Yeah, I appreciate all 7 of the ideas, and we've talked about them. 3 years ago, we had an RDA info session, open house at the Red Tree Room, Red Iguana 2. You remember this at all? We had developers there who own property there, who probably still own property along that section of North Temple, particularly the freeway to 10th West, maybe a little past that to the river. The feedback was there is an image problem. There's a fundamental image problem there. It's still an image problem there. If we talk about the neighborhood getting involved, the neighborhood refuses to go down to North Temple. They live in the neighborhood. They will not go there. It's unsafe for them. They perceive it as unsafe. They're all great ideas, but fundamentally the growth is happening west of Redwood Road. This section of North Temple has a major problem in the Gateway Motel. Now, I'm not saying that's the whole problem in the entire area, but if we want a metric to look at in community engagement and developer change of perception, the perception changes when crime rates go down right there. I don't know that we're going to do a whole lot until we get to that point. And I know the RDA can't control a lot of this piece, but when I look at number 7, property acquisition, a catalytic project for me is removing some element that is inhibiting the growth and then letting everything else start its own reactions. Existing developers who own land, who are sitting on it because they make money off of things probably we don't want them to make money off of there, who don't want to develop because they're not quite sure it's going to last. That's a few months of a police intervention. It's pent-up demand, but it won't happen until we do something to remove a problem there, I think, in my personal opinion. And I look at that first graph we saw about the growth. It's negative growth. How do we have an RDA area for this long with multiple track stations and negative growth? That just astounds me. especially looking at the rest of the city and the rest of the Wasatch Front that has tremendous growth at almost every front runner and track station. And it's reversed here. So for me, from a personal perspective, this is going to be expensive, but I think we need to look at property acquisition there, and we need to take away some issues that are problems, particularly on that 3-block stretch from the freeway to 10th West, where the public market may go based on the feasibility study, and look at the metrics of decreased crime, increased housing, number one, for people to activate the space as 2 major metrics to look at there. Otherwise, I think they're great ideas, and I agree with all of the concepts, and they do work in limited fashion, but we have a fundamental core issue right here that's not going to be addressed by that, at least anytime soon, and maybe not even before the RDA area expires. So from 2 cents of what it's worth, that's what I would like to see us look at, a bolder statement about property acquisition to figure out some change there.
And in response to that, I would say that in our staff notes, as we were kind of talking about definition of catalytic, one of those is exactly that, removing the undesirable uses or issues surrounding why development's not occurring. And then I would just want to say again that, if you recall, was the board's direction for us to purchase the overnighter motel. And that's why we're doing that project right now. And obviously I'd love to buy up the other 3 motels, and I think your point is valid that would be expensive, and if certainly we could try to find creative ways to do that, but that's exactly what we're trying to do. And if we can move on down North Temple and keep doing that, that would probably be just as catalytic as anything else as well.
Thank you, Andrew. Is there any other comments on this? I just want to say I really appreciate the work, and I think that this really has, I want to say thank you to Chris for paying attention to my directive and my no, but I think it really, with Andrew's comments as well, opens up what a good policy, a future policy discussion, not just for the North Temple, but for, we've talked in the past of having seed funds for these quote unquote catalytic projects, but unless we sort of identify, and that definition may change for each project area, of course, but I think before we get started using seed funds or doing something, it's this process of what does the community want, what does it mean to be a catalytic project, and how can we get the best bang for our buck, right? And so I appreciate that discussion and look forward to further discussion on that. And I think, Danny, you and I can follow up just when you'll be ready, either November, December, to present that, but that can be offline at this point. Yeah. So thank you for this preliminary discussion, and I really look forward to future discussions on this and getting an awesome catalytic project in North Temple. With that, we have another policy discussion to be had, and that is policies for project areas not collecting tax increment. So I will welcome to the table Jen, Bruno, you can stay here if you'd like, Danny, and Tammy.
Yes. Do you want to start by explaining the wordy title, or do you want to just jump right in?
The resolution does have a wordy title, but we wanted to be clear what we were talking about. Should I jump in?
Go for it.
All right, this is a follow-up briefing from a briefing that took place earlier in the year with an update on project areas that are no longer collecting tax increment funds. And so we're back with a policy resolution and additional information for you. So just a high-level overview, a project area is considered active as per state statute when it is adopted, when the plan's adopted by both the City Council and the RDA Board. So we have 4 active project areas that are not collecting tax increment at this time. We have 2 that are in kind of a post-collection phase, and that's Sugar House and West Temple Gateway. And then we have 2 that are in a pre-collection phase, which are 9 Line and State Street. So beginning with the post-collection period project areas, we received direction from the board earlier in the year when we presented a briefing that you would still like to see specifically the RDA loan program utilized post-collection period before the project area is officially closed out. And so we came back with a policy resolution, which is in your packet, that lays out specific conditions for dissolving a project area. So we basically would expend all tax increment funds that have been generated from the project area before we close the project area out. Dispose of all property the RDA owns. So for example, in the Sugar House project area, we still own the DI site. We would complete that project, dispose of the property before finalizing that and closing the project area out, and then complete all public infrastructure projects. So for example, in West Temple Gateway, we have the 9th South Streetscape project that's going on. So once those three conditions are kind of fulfilled, we would move forward with the dissolution process, which requires an ordinance by the City Council and a resolution by the RDA Board. So going back to using RDA tools before that happens, we're already prevented from using the tax increment reimbursement program just by the nature of we're no longer collecting tax increment. But in terms of the RDA loan program, in the policy resolution, we are proposing that for non-RDA projects, we would still have the RDA loan program active and available for developers 2 years after the termination of that collection period. And then for RDA-led projects, like for RDA-owned property, we would keep the RDA loan program available through the end, up to the point of dissolution. So those are kind of the two recommendations that we put forward in the resolution for that. And then, of course, for any project that includes affordable housing, we can use RDA tools citywide, so the RDA loan program would still be available for affordable housing projects in project areas that we are already dissolved. So the resolution attached to your packet, it's just really contains the policies for conditions for dissolving the project area and then utilizing the RDA loan program before the project area is dissolved. The second piece of the briefing, this isn't an action item, this is just more informational for you on the two pre-collection project areas, so State Street and 9 Line. As we mentioned earlier in the meeting, we did have movement with the school district last week where they voted to move forward with State Street and 9 Line. So that was great news. The other two large taxing entities are the county and the city. So the county, we are planning to ramp up discussions with them now that the school district has signed off. The county had prioritized Block 67 higher than 9 Line and State Street, and those negotiations have ramped up, or completed. So we really feel like we can ramp up the negotiations with 9 Line and State Street. And then once we have a complete picture of what we're doing with both the county and the school district, we will come back to the city, because of course we have to negotiate an interlocal with the city council as well. So we will come back and engage the city council on discussions with an interlocal there. So those are the top three taxing entities. And then of course there's still opportunity, if the board wishes, we could engage the Salt Lake City Library as well. That's kind of the fourth largest taxing entity. Engage them in the process to negotiate an interlocal.
Madam Chair, could I ask a question? Tammy, on the conditions for dissolution, I'm curious about the RDA-owned property being disposed of unless it's been identified for long-term use. I think about, Gallivan, like, of course we're going to that's a long-term use. And then I think about other properties like our SRO building, and it has been a long-term use, but I could see where we reconsider whether or not we need to or want to continue to own those kind of buildings. Did you, in coming up with these conditions, identify some potential conflicts where we might acquire something, hold it, and think we want to hold it, but then come up to a policy shift in terms of housing, for example, where we maybe wish we had the RDA tools, or we don't want to maintain an RDA. I know that when we have too much in our portfolio, then we can't do new project areas. And you presented an awesome presentation on a whole bunch of potential new project areas, but I guess I don't want to tie our hands too much with preservation of long-term properties, meaning we have a project area, we're keeping it.
Right. I think that would obviously be a decision. I don't want to say case-by-case basis, but arguably that could come into play. Your point about housing is noted, because I think that would be one where, because we can continue to do housing citywide, then that may not necessarily come into play in a specific project area. I think for us, we didn't really come into any conflicts as much as just trying to recognize the different types of property that we currently own that are not necessarily we're looking at disposing of anytime soon, but that could potentially be a factor in terms of when you would want to expire a project area if you want to keep those tools available. I think it also comes into play if the agency starts looking at doing different types of property disposition or development, if we really wanted to start doing more long-term ground leases or joint venture opportunities. That may be a conflict as to the long-term holding of that as it relates to a project area dissolution. I think for us, we really just looked at it as identifying when development of the property would be done, and therefore the need of the tools wouldn't exist anymore, versus identifying a property that we would continue to hold and just don't need the project area to justify it anymore, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks.
So in the resolution, we just wanted to leave room for the ability to continue to own property after the project area has been dissolved. So.
Madam Chair.
I have a question as to how this may affect, either negatively or positively or not at all, the ballpark and Central City, because those are two areas that we're not collecting. Well, we've never collected tax increment from ballpark, right?
No, Central
did.
City, we haven't. Ballpark, we
Right. I knew there was one of them. And they're not active or something. They're sort of in flux. So how, but we know that we want to do some things, or we have some sites and some goals for at least ballpark, right? And I don't want to create a policy that could hinder us from doing any of those things, right? So how would this affect those areas?
I would say with regard to Central City, that was probably one of the project areas that originally initiated this conversation, as Central City was designated early on as a target area for housing, and where we can continue to do housing citywide. We really don't need it anymore. And so that's kind of what started the conversation of how do we officially dissolve that one. So I think that would probably then take place once this policy is in motion. As far as ballpark, I think to that extent, I think your probably wisest course of action is to understand that the property within ballpark right now is city-owned. So while it's not agency-owned property, that we're looking to keep the project area available for agency tools. I think as we look at options for developing that, we take the mindset almost as if it's agency-owned, and that we want to preserve the opportunity to utilize tools. But arguably our next steps with ballpark would probably be to start looking at how we want to develop that area, and to what extent we may want to look at either incorporating that into the State Street project area, treating it as its own project area, or just coming back to the board and presenting those options of really what to do with it.
Is there any further discussion on this? I like the policy myself. I like having a direction, so I'm in support of it. We can or cannot, don't have to take action. Is there any strong feelings on this? Otherwise, I'm putting it on November's agenda to
Madam
take
Chair,
action.
may
Yes.
I just open it up? The resolution is just strictly for post-collection area, project areas, and I don't know if you want to offer any policy guidance on pre-collection areas. You just approved a loan for West End, so it seems like you're in favor of using RDA loan program tools.
I am.
now.
I don't know
so.
if other people are, but they did also agree. so.
Well, you did.
And it just behooves the project area because it's stimulating projects and tax growth before the project area triggers.
May I suggest that you, please, come back with some language that you think, similar to what we did here. So I think it's helpful when we kind of have the people who do this every day and are the experts in it, if you will, kind of guide us a little bit on some of these things. So that I like the 2-year idea. I like the until it's dissolved idea, right? And that makes sense to me. And so I don't have to think extra hard on it, but I can, right? So maybe you could come back with some policy language or potential policy language, ordinance resolution language for us, kind of based on what happened today and reading our minds that you're good at. And then we would have something a little bit more to discuss. And we can put that in the future. You know, I don't think we need a huge rush on it, but maybe like a December, January type of timeline. If that works, Danny will tell me if it doesn't work later after.
Can do that.
So
Perfect.
I think that just helps the discussion, spur the discussion. And does anyone want to take action on this today, or do you want it on? Charlie? No? He just looked at me. Okay, then we'll take action in November, so y'all can think about it for another 3 weeks. All right, next on the list. I don't see an executive director here at our meeting today, so is there announcements from the RDA staff? And I know David was here earlier, but he's not here now, so.
Yes, we have 2, just real quick, following up on previous comments regarding the school district's approval of the State Street and 9 Line project areas. Just want to inform the board that the school district, they voted 5-2. Part of that was part of the conversation they had. School district has expressed a lot of interest and concern about us continuing, not only as part of our approval of those project areas, but just in general working with the school district of really starting as an agency trying to identify how we can incorporate within our housing efforts things that somewhat align more with what their goals are of more families, housing developments with larger units, also some of those infrastructure improvements that we talked about in the North Temple. So those are conversations we'll continue to have. You'll start probably seeing some of those elements as we bring back policy discussions for the board. And just so you know that a lot of that is coming from the school district of wanting to see that in the work we do. So continuing to build that. So that is one announcement. The other is to announce our latest project manager. Her name is Ashley Scarf. I'm looking at the notes that Amanda wrote for me, and it simply says she's great. I think you as a board might want to know a little bit more. No, Ashley comes to us by way of Pittsburgh. She came to the University of Utah to get her master's degree. She has worked at Park City and most recently 2 years in our planning department, and we warned her that you may or may not call her up here if you want to ask her questions or embarrass her, but I'm sure she's back there nodding her head no, that she doesn't want to do that. But
indeed she was. Hi, Amanda. Ashley. Sorry, Amanda was in we're going to get to know each other really well. I spend a lot of time down in the RDA offices, so.
We're very fortunate to have her, excited that she's on board, and certainly it starts helping us fill our project or manager opening. So those are all the updates we have.
Welcome.
So
great. Vice Chair, anything from you? Anything from me? I don't think so either. No written briefings. We do have a consent item.
Madam Chair, I move the consent agenda.
Second.
I have a motion by Board Member Luke, a second by Board Member Wharton. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okey doke. That's it. Mr. Chair?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We will, this is so loud today, I don't know what the deal is. We will take a break until 4:30, and where we will convene and hear from the Gardner Policy Institute.
Awesome. Thank you.